already got to introduce CLA and myself, so I think we can skip that part, and want to welcome you to this segment of the treasurer, introducing the treasurer. Welcome the opportunity here to introduce Treasurer Erick Russell. Erick became Connecticut's 84th state treasurer on January 4th, 2023. He manages the state's pension funds, cash flow, unclaimed property, and the Connecticut Higher Education Trust, CHET. Key achievement in his first term is launching the nation's first statewide baby bonds initiative. Previously, Erick was a partner at Pullman and Comley and advised municipalities in the state on financing infrastructure, managing debt, and restructuring pensions. Erick was born in New Haven. He earned degrees from the University of New Haven and UConn School of Law. In 2022, Treasurer Russell made history as the first Black openly LGBTQ person elected to statewide office in U.S. history. So please join me in welcoming Treasurer Russell.
All right. How's everyone doing? I'm going to stay here because of the microphones, but I do feel like it's a little formal for the room, but we're going to make it work. It is great to be with you guys, though, and thank you to the Chamber and Chris for putting this together and the invitation, and Brett, thanks for the very kind introduction. Really want to use this opportunity just to give you an update on some of the work that we do in the Treasurer's office. I think the most common comment that I get, particularly when I was running for the first time, was we know the Treasurer's involved in kind of handling money, but outside of that, I have no idea what you do on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to cover a little bit of that, a little bit of kind of the overall fiscal position of the state right now, and then want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions and just conversation. So feel free to jump in at any point with questions as well. I guess just to start, in terms of thinking about the state's overall position, and this has been really important to me in thinking about the progress we've made. So 10 years ago, we were in a spot as a state where we were jumping from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis. We had no money set aside in reserves. We were borrowing for operational expenses. We were just in a really difficult spot as a state. And it had been not from anything in the short term. It had been from, frankly, poor decision-making over a long period of time as a state. And if you look at where we sit today, we couldn't be in a more different place. We've just passed through the legislative session what will be the 8th balanced budget for the state of Connecticut in a row. We have a budget reserve fund that sits at 18% of budget, so $4.8 billion that's set aside for us to deal with a downturn in the market or volatility. We have made over $10 billion in additional contributions to our pension fund. And as we'll talk about the pension fund in a little bit more detail, but we went about 70 years without properly funding our pensions. And so we've been doing a lot of work in recent years to, one, make sure we're making our required contributions, but making these significant additional contributions to make up for that lost time that we had. At the end of this budget year, we're expecting that we're going to put over $1 billion of additional contribution in, again, on top of that 10.1. And we have seen numerous upgrades to our credit rating, which is really important. You can think about that just as your personal credit score. The state has a credit rating that, as people are out buying our bonds, when we're able to borrow for purchasing or building out schools or infrastructure, it allows us to do it at a lower cost to taxpayers. A lot of this is in part to fiscal guardrails that have been put in place. They were passed back in 2017. And those outline all of the parameters around how we set budgets, how much we can borrow, how much we can spend, and then when we have extra surplus or extra resources, how those funds are used, which the primary focus has been paying down long-term pension debt. Just as an overview of our office, some of the core divisions, as was mentioned, you can think about the role of treasurer as essentially the elected CFO in the state. And so the cash management side, all of the cash that we sit on as a state, that includes that reserve fund that I mentioned. But it's really about making sure we have the liquidity to pay our bills on time without running into issues. We also manage the cash that we have on hand and invest that in a short-term investment fund that we actively manage in the office. And we've been able to get really strong returns on that cash. So for last fiscal year, so fiscal year 2025, we got just shy of 5%. We were at about 4.86% on that cash on hand. Put that in perspective, we added about $865 million to that short-term cash pool by investing that on a short-term basis. And we outperformed our benchmarks on that front. So we beat out our benchmark by about another $37 million. So that's the cash management team. It's all of our banking relationships for the state as well. Debt management is ultimately how, as we issue debt, as we issue bonds for funding of different programs in the state. We have 4 core programs that we issue bonds for. We have our general obligation bond program. So those are, you can think about, those are things that are just backed by taxpayer dollars. So anything that's being built out in the community, school construction, anything that's kind of funding that comes to municipalities like West Hartford. We have our our special transportation fund. So that is the kind of lockbox that we have that is funded by gas taxes or fees that you pay at the DMV. And those bonds ultimately help to pay for road construction, bridges, all of the transportation infrastructure in the state. We have our Yukon funding program. So there's kind of 2 components to that, but investment in Yukon and building out infrastructure there. And then we have our clean and drinking water bond program, which we actually just finished a sale for. We refinanced outstanding bonds on the drinking water program. That is for municipalities. So it allows at 100% cost, we issue debt for municipalities to build out drinking water and wastewater infrastructure to build that up, where the state is ultimately subsidizing that. We just refinanced outstanding bonds, and so we think about it as refunding a mortgage, but it is going to save taxpayers about $10 million over the next 9 years or so of savings there. Unclaimed property, for anyone not familiar with it, you should check out our website for unclaimed property. So missingmoney.com is the kind of broader, that's how you can check if you have any unclaimed property anywhere in the country. And these are all resources that we're trying to get back to residents of the state. The Connecticut one is ctbiglist.gov. If you have any unclaimed property, could be an old bank account, it could be a doctor's office owed you a check, it could be a security deposit box that you lost track of. Those resources are required to be turned over to the treasurer's office, and our goal is to get that back to people as quickly as possible. Municipalities and businesses also fall into that category. We recently had a business that we returned about $4.5 million to that they were not aware of. They did not want their name out there as a result of that. But it's just a good thing to check actively. I always encourage people to do it as you file your taxes, just so that it's kind of a regular thing that you check on. But we returned about $121 million back to residents last fiscal year. Our goal is to continue to improve this process. And a lot of that has been by implementing new technology, streamlining the process, and making sure we can do it more efficiently. And then pension fund management, which I will do a little bit of a deeper dive on, but we have 6 state pension funds and then 13 trusts that are all part of that broader CRPTF. And then obviously our big picture goals there are maximizing risk-adjusted returns on the investments that we're making, so that we are protecting the retirement security of state employees and teachers and retirees that we serve. This is the overall CRPTF. All of these numbers are going to be as of the end of fiscal year 25. So this is as of June 30 of last year. The fund sat at about $63 billion. Our target rate of return is 6.9%. That's what's built into all of our assumptions. So for fiscal year 2025, we performed at 10.14%. That built on the prior fiscal year, which was at 11.5%. There's been a lot of work since we've come into office to really improve performance. And we've gone through some pretty significant processes in terms of changing our overall asset allocation. So you can think about that as how much of each kind of bucket we have money invested in: private equity, private credit, equities, fixed income. And that's really the main driver of your performance as a fund. And so we've done a lot of work. We're actually going through a full process to review that right now. We've implemented new risk mitigation strategies. We've done a lot of work to reduce fees. We've been trying to use fewer managers that we're scaling up with so we can kind of get better economics on those transactions. But I will say the most important thing has been the team that we have in place and the recruitment and retention of strong investment talent. If you look at where we were historically, there was a 12-year window in Connecticut where we had 10 different chief investment officers. And so it was this revolving door of people coming in and out. And it's really hard as long-term investors to have long-term strategy and implement that when there's so much turnover. And so we've worked closely with the legislature to make sure we can be more competitive in terms of compensation, but also that we have flexibility to really go out, find the right people, be able to develop them through the organization over time. And I think that that's been a big piece of what's led to really strong performance. For the calendar year, again, this was as of June 30. For the calendar year, as of December 31st, we sat at about 70 billion in assets under management, and our performance was at about 12.4% for the calendar year. I'm sorry, at 14% for the calendar year. That brings our 3-year number. So over the last 3 calendar years, we're at about 12.4% for performance. Huge amount of growth, a huge amount of progress. Again, we're longer term, but this is having a really big impact on the state's making progress overall. This shows performance, the teachers' retirement fund, the state employees' retirement fund, and then the municipal employees. Those are our 3 biggest plans in the portfolio. So this just maps out performance kind of on a 1, 3, 5, 7, and 10-year basis. As you look at this 10-year number, remember our target is the 6.9%. So as we've performed a lot better in the short term, it's really brought up that long-term number. And as we're outperforming those targets and as we continue to add money to the fund, what it's doing is lowering our fixed costs. So it's providing relief for taxpayers. It's more money that we're freeing up in our budget that we can invest in services and programs for families in the state. And as I mentioned, you look at 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, we sat just shy of $30 billion in assets under management. Today, we sit north of $72 billion. Huge amount of progress in a short time. It's been a really big deal for the state. We'll get out of the wonky pension fund stuff to jump over. There are a lot of other programs that we run in the office that are not, I guess, as front of mind for people when thinking about the treasurer's office, but I just want to highlight a few of them. As Brett mentioned, Connecticut Baby Bonds is a program we're incredibly proud of. This is a program about addressing wealth inequality in Connecticut. So we launched this on July 1st of 2023. And as of that date, every child who's born into poverty, which we use for every child whose birth is covered by Husky, the state's Medicaid program, they automatically have $3,200 that is invested on their behalf in a trust. And we invest those funds over the life of that child. We do this alongside our pension assets. And when they're between the ages of 18 and 30, they can access those funds for wealth building purposes. So they can use it to help purchase a home here in Connecticut, to start or invest in a Connecticut business, to help pay for post-secondary education or job training, or they can use it to roll into a retirement savings account. We have about 45,000 children now that have already been born eligible for baby bonds, and I think it says something about the scale of the problem of poverty. About 45% of children born in Connecticut every year are born into poverty. And so this program is really exciting. We're working with a lot of other states that are interested in trying to replicate the program, but really proud of the folks that have been involved in supporting this and getting it done. We talked about unclaimed property. The Early Childhood Education Endowment, which is a really big deal. This was led by the governor and the legislature, was launched last fiscal year with $300 million of surplus out of the budget that funded this endowment. Through this legislative session, we just announced that it's anticipated that there'll be another $320 million or so of surplus this year that is going to be added to the endowment at the end of the fiscal year. And we are responsible for administering this endowment. And so we oversee the endowment and all of the investment. The $300 million that's in there now has already grown to about just shy of $340 million over the last year. But the goal here is that starting in 2027, families that are part of the Early Start childcare program that make under $100,000 a year will have access to free childcare through this endowment. and any family making over $100,000 a year will be capped at 7% of their income for the cost of childcare. This is huge, one, because it's just a key investment in children at the most important developmental time of their lives, but also from an economic perspective. We have about 80,000 jobs in Connecticut right now that are unfilled, and we know that there are so many families that are deciding whether or not a parent can go back to work, or it makes sense for them to go back to work when the cost of childcare in many cases would negate anything that you're going to earn. And so that's the goal of the endowment. The plan there is that this will ultimately be a self-sustaining way of providing access to quality, affordable childcare. Chet and Able are our 529 accounts. I know Brett mentioned this as well. One key thing I think on the Chet accounts is that last session we also passed legislation that provides a tax credit for Connecticut businesses that contribute to Chet accounts for their employees. And so this was, again, encouraging people to think ahead, saving in advance for future education, but also providing that benefit to employers. Able is a 529 account, but that is specific to individuals with disabilities. And what it does is allow families to set aside these resources that will be invested on a tax advantage basis without jeopardizing that individual's SSI benefits with that Able account. And then the last thing I'll mention is the Safe Harbor Fund, which is another first in the nation program that we launched. There'll be some upcoming news on this, but this was a fund that will assist individuals traveling from outside of Connecticut that don't have access to reproductive or gender affirming care in their home states, that these resources privately funded that will help them travel to Connecticut or states like Connecticut to get the care that they ultimately need. Hard to talk about the state of Connecticut and the impact without addressing what's happening on the federal level. I'll keep this high level. I think that we have seen, and the biggest challenge has been so much of the uncertainty and volatility and kind of stop and go policy or decision making. We saw a lot of this last year as decisions were being made to cut funding to programs like SNAP for food assistance, obviously cuts to Medicaid, which we're already seeing impact families in terms of premiums going up, but we're going to see a lot of drop off for coverage heading into next year, which I think the state is really trying to set up and be prepared for. We've seen a lot of impacts from tariff policy across the state, and I know I've had several conversations with businesses in Connecticut, one recently that closed as a result of tariff policy that pretty much killed the whole model of their business. All of this is impacting us and the overall environment. What we are trying to do as a state, and I think there's been really strong leadership from the governor and from the legislature, is be as flexible as possible in adapting to what's going on. Fortunately, I think our discipline has put us in a spot where we have the resources to navigate some of these challenges in a much different way than other states. I can tell you I've spoken to colleagues in some states that are very well run, that are AAA rated, but that they are not sitting on the reserves that we have. They are much more impacted by cuts on the federal level or employment decisions on the federal level. And so we've been able to be as flexible as possible, but the reality is that these things are all going to have an impact on what we're doing. You've probably seen some of the coverage, but last year what we did was we took $500 million of surplus money and actually added that to our reserves, and it's sitting in a kind of a federal account. And what we were able to do was use that to backstop cuts to particularly food assistance programs. We just have recently seen this around some of the other services and programming that has really been impacted on the federal level, research and development, for example. So, we're navigating it best we can, but this is all having an impact. And so I think what we're going to need to do is continue to kind of make sure that we're in a strong spot to adapt and adjust. The goal will obviously be to protect the most vulnerable residents in our state, but trying to make sure that we're also being disciplined about where we're going to be on a long-term basis as well. So wanted to keep it brief. I know there's a lot of content that I'm running through quickly, but would love to be more interactive. So happy to take any questions or comments or thoughts that folks have for us to talk through. Sure.
Hold it that way the sound gets picked up by the camera.
Given the taxes that Connecticut pays to the federal government, do we get more or less back?
We are a net donor in a huge way, just like, frankly, most blue states that are driving a lot of the economies across the country. And listen, there were a lot of conversations around this particularly when the new administration first came in, and there were a lot of these threats to cuts and things like that. But yeah, Connecticut is a massive donor on the federal level. We pay more out than we get back. And I will say, like, past the partisan nature, I'm not even speaking from that perspective, but the reality is a lot of the red states that are, to your point, not paying as much into the federal government are also a lot more dependent on these federal services. And so I do think that what we're going to see when you talk about programs like Medicaid, like food assistance, when you talk about impacts to rural hospitals in a lot of these states, they're going to get hit harder than even we are in some ways. And it's going to be interesting to see what the response is to some of this policy as it rolls out. You look at Medicaid, for example, the way that this was said is that it doesn't really take effect until after this midterm election. And so we're going to see January, where a lot of this roll-off is going to happen. And it's being done in a way where it's not, okay, we're cutting your healthcare. It's that we're going to put all of these arbitrary requirements in place that we know people are not going to ultimately meet, and that's how they are then going to fall off. And so part of what we're trying to do in Connecticut is actually prepare for some of that, so that it's going to be, so work requirements, for example, right? We know that in Connecticut, over 80% of people who are receiving this type of assistance are working, right? But are those going to be the folks that are going to be in a spot to upload their check every week to prove that they're working? Not to mention the administrative burden it's going to put on states. Connecticut is now going to have to process all of this stuff to keep up with it. And so I think the expectation is there's going to be a lot of this type of drop off in these challenges because of some of these roadblocks that are being put in place.
Well, first I want to congratulate you on your excellent job that you've been doing as state treasurer, particularly with respect to the pension investment funds.
Thank you.
And first question is, what do you attribute to having gained and increased the return on investment with respect to the pension funding? Two, who is your chief investment officer these days?
Yeah.
And three, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the the advisory pension commission.
Investment Advisory Council?
Council,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah, so a couple things. So one, the top thing that I would say for performance and progress that we've made has been the investment team. And I can't give them enough credit. The reality is that our team could be individually, they all could be off doing a lot of other things in investment, making a lot more money than they are here in Connecticut. And they're doing this work because they care about the state and they care about the folks that we're working on behalf of. And so, Ted Wright is our chief investment officer. He's been with us for about 5 years now. He came from LaSera. He was out in Los Angeles. So we got him to move from sunny California and then endure some winters. But he's done a great job. We've built out a really strong team and a really strong culture of excellence in the office, and have really been able to build out a diversified team. We're attracting a talent from, when we are posting positions, from all over the country. And I think a lot of this is about the progress that we've made, but people, I think, are excited to come work in Connecticut now. We're funding our pensions. We're doing innovative things on the pension fund side, right? There's been stability. So I think all of that has been really important. Obviously, asset allocation is driving a lot of this, and the fact that we're putting extra money into the fund, which frankly has gone into equities because it takes us time to deploy to private markets, and that's been really beneficial to us on the performance front. And the Investment Advisory Council has been really key in this. One of the first pieces of legislation that I put in was to strengthen the Investment Advisory Council, to actually give it more power, but also to make sure that we could get the right people on that body. So for folks unfamiliar, the Investment Advisory Council sets our investment policy statement and our asset allocation. So they set all the guidelines around which we can invest, and then we bring every manager that we're going to be investing in to the IAC for them to review and ask questions and to provide feedback on. And when I first came in, the rule was in the investment, there was a restriction from anyone who was actually working in the investment space for being on the investment advisory council, which to me was very backwards. And so we changed that where, the goal was to make sure that you didn't have conflicts from people sitting on the IAC. So what we did is anyone would have to disclose a potential conflict just like you would with any other board and recuse themselves from that review. But with that, we've been able to bring in some incredible talent. The chair of the IAC is the sitting CIO for the Michigan State University Endowment. We have former Yale Endowment folks on the board. We have folks that sit on some of the largest investment boards in the country and in the world. And so we've been a lot of people who are actively, the person who oversees private assets at HIMCO sits on our board now. So we've been able to bring a lot of talent in that have been able to provide really great feedback, that have a really great lens into what's happening around the world and around the investment space. And so I think all of those things have really had a significant impact. And there's still more work we're doing. As I mentioned, cleaning up the portfolio, making it more efficient. I think a lot of my job in this investment side is probably where I spend most of my time. But it's also about making sure that the investment team has the freedom and ability to work it and focus on investments. And I can handle the rest of it, right? I don't want the team thinking about anything past that. And I think it's had a really significant impact on where we're going, and certainly have more work to do, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I just want to finally say, I know several people who are still working in the office under you, and they love you.
Oh.
And I think that's important in customer relations, so to speak, right? You're only as good as the people you have that you employ and who work for you and who are happy. And by all accounts, you're doing a heck of a job.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Looks like Brett's got a question. I will tell you.
Don't ask my guys that are in the room though. They might have a different answer.
I'm just curious. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our clients now on the technology side, evaluating existing technologies, introducing new technologies to make them more efficient and help them grow. Is that a big investment or a part of your budget at the state level? And is there any way to kind of evaluate existing ROI or, what you kind of see in the future there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think we're constantly looking for ways to be more efficient. I think the challenge is that it's not going to be a surprise to anyone in the room. It's sometimes in state government, it's challenging to get these types of investments done, right? Because it's, it's just, we're often described as the land of steady habits. And I think especially in government, that tends to be the case. I think in different spaces, we've really been able to maximize those opportunities. So as I mentioned with unclaimed property, we've had some really significant additions from a technology perspective, and it's had a huge impact. So if you think about unclaimed property, you go online, you see you have unclaimed property. You used to have to submit a claim for that. You would upload documents. That stuff would come to someone in the office. They would review all of your documentation, evaluate whether or not they had everything they needed, would approve that. Then it would go to the comptroller's office to send you a check that would then go out. And obviously that takes a lot of time. And that would be the same process for a claim that was for 25 cents versus a claim that was $25,000. And through some new programs now, we have matching software, so it can match up different information that we have about you, the accuracy of that, match up your documents. And for claims that are under a certain amount, we actually can automatically approve those where a check just goes out. For now, like a lot of people don't even actually have to submit a claim for their funds anymore. We just send you a letter and then a check follows. What that type of technology has provided us to do is the individuals that were processing those claims can now focus on the more complicated, complex claims, the ones that are higher dollar value, where there's more concern around fraud. It's freeing up, people and time to really focus on the stuff that can churn a lot of these things over. And with that, we've been able to get rid of almost our entire backlog of claims that were coming in previously. So I think we're going to continue to look for ways to do this. Obviously, on the investment front and through PFM, there's a lot of technology being used. I think we're certainly going to be looking for ways to be more efficient there. I think AI is going to be a real thing that, in terms of ways that you can use it, that's going to protect privacy and things like that that are really important, but that can help people in the office do their job more efficiently. And so, I think we're going to constantly be looking at ways to be better around technology.
I have a question. So related to Chet and the Able Fund, is there any fluidity between the two accounts? And the reason I ask is very common, parents, grandparents, right at birth, start a Chet. Something happens, there's a late diagnosis, and now you have a disabled child that you weren't aware of. Can you move Chet money into the Able
You
Fund?
can. It's still under that same 529 bucket, so you'd be able to do that. So Able just recently expanded. So it used to be that someone, the individual with a disability, it had to occur before the age of 26.
Okay.
That was just expanded. We expanded it here in Connecticut, but on the federal level as well, up to 46, the age of 46. And part of that, and where I think there's going to be a lot of new opening and use of Able accounts, is going to be for veterans, right? If you have people who were injured or became disabled in the military that may not have had access to this because it happened after they were 26 years old. And so, that's another piece to this. But yes, you can cross between those two accounts.
Okay, great.
Thank you. As a prospective business owner, what of either your presentation or even just kind of your personal point of view, what should I take away from this is hey, the reason to believe in, owning and operating and growing a business for the next 10, 20, 25 years?
I would say Connecticut's back. When you think about business in Connecticut, I think one of the biggest challenges historically, right? And we had this conversation, and there was a lot of kind of politicizing of certain businesses leaving. I think GE was always the perfect example of this, where, people said, Connecticut's in such bad shape that you had GE leave because taxes were too high. GE went to Boston. GE didn't leave because of taxes, right? They didn't have a lower cost to be in Boston. The reality is that there's a company that wants to attract young talent, and they wanted to be in a city where people are coming out of school, and that's fine. But there was a reality to the uncertainty of the environment 10 and 20 years ago, where as a state, we would come into a budget cycle and then we'd have a $2 billion hole in the budget, and people didn't know what taxes were going up or what stability was there. And I think we've seen that change. I think all of this work, and this is very early on in this process, but I think if you see the commitment to turning the state around, I think there is a balance of, one, getting our fiscal house in order, lowering our fixed costs, which is allowing us to lower costs for businesses and residents in the state, and we'll continue to do that over time, but also investment in people. And I think this is something that we can't lose sight of. People love being in Connecticut because there's so much that the state has to offer. It's a great place to raise a family. You have incredible schools. There's great culture and a lot of work that's happening around infrastructure. I think being able to show the balance of getting our fiscal house in order, putting the state on a sound place with stability for individuals and for businesses, but also not losing that commitment to invest, being the best place to raise a family, making childcare more affordable, creating opportunities where we're leveling the playing field and lifting everyone up, knowing that if we have more people meaningfully participating in the state long-term, that's going to be better for everyone. And so I think all of these things being put together, I think should give people a lot of confidence in the direction that Connecticut continues to move in, where we're balancing kind of that big picture kind of state of the state with being an incredible place to live and raise a family. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks. You could be doing a lot of things on a beautiful Thursday night versus talking about pension funds. So appreciate you all being here and the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you.